Hey Rim, how you doing?
I'm doing well, Gigi. Thank you so much for having me today.
Oh, I'm so excited to have you on my channel. It's taken us a little while to get together, hasn't it?
Yes, but we persevered.
You have because you were worth talking to. So I'm really grateful. There's a big time difference between where you are and I am. So I know it's first thing in the morning with you. So thank you for doing that for me on a weekend. Very grateful.
Absolutely.
Cool. So we're going to have a little bit of a chat about Amazon interview process in particular, and of course, how it relates to your particular role. So, why don't we start with you introducing yourself? Tell us what it is that you do at Amazon.
Absolutely. So at Amazon, I'm a principal program manager within Prime Air. And Prime Air is the drone delivery service program. And I'm part of the engineering, science, and technology organization. And I like to describe my role as within engineering, making sure the right hand knows what the left hand is doing. Are the right processes in place? Do we know how to operate effectively? And then when it comes to the engineering organization interfacing with flight operations, quality, safety, again, that concept of does the right hand know what the left hand is doing and making sure we have the right interfaces in place.
Awesome. It sounds like a really cool job. I always think kind of Prime Air, they're always recruiting and the job seems so diverse.
Yes, it's a really fascinating space to be in right now.
Cool, cool. So, in which case, could you tell us a little bit about your journey to Amazon? How did you arrive at Amazon?
Absolutely. So I have a background in industrial engineering and actually started my career with the Boeing company. So started
Ah,
out in final assembly manufacturing, working really closely with the build of an aircraft, went into supplier management. I've also did a stint in IT infrastructure operations via a rotation program. Then I had the opportunity to enter into program management roles. And through those program management roles, found them very interesting, really got to see, I'll say, the forest and not just focused on the trees, really see the breadth of what an organization is doing. And I spent about 8 years at Boeing and then started to just get curious. I did my MBA program at the University of Washington and got to meet a couple of Amazonians through there. And I guess at the time, even though I'm based in the Puget Sound, I hear about Amazon a lot. I had never considered that going into tech was something for me. I just thought, oh, I'm an aerospace person. I don't think Amazon would ever want me. And just through conversations with my MBA colleagues, really got interested and then started to look for opportunities, make connections, and in early 2020, there's a wonderful opportunity to join Amazon in the transportation operations space, where I was leading global initiatives for standardization. And here I am today. And so it's been a wonderful journey and a wonderful experience.
awesome. So, you just mentioned something that's really, really curious to me in terms of an anomaly. So, like you, I wasn't from a FANG. I did come from tech. I came from
Mm.
telecommunications as far as tech is concerned. But Amazon wasn't really somewhere that I had ever particularly focused on. This is where I wanted to work because I'm a marketer. And certainly at the time I joined like 6 years ago, Amazon was not big into marketing. I think Jeff had even made a statement once that if you had to spend money on marketing, it was an illustration of a failure of your product. Obviously, he's changed his mind because he has a huge Amazon advertising organization, but won't go there. But I see there's a lot of people out there that want to break into tech,
Mm.
and kind of the assumption that to work in a tech organization you have to be technical. You have to know how to code, etc., etc. Now,
Yeah.
obviously I know nothing about anything technical from a marketing standpoint, but what are your thoughts on kind of program management and the need or lack thereof to come from a tech background in order to be able to apply to somewhere like Amazon? I didn't prep you for this question, I know, but you've just said it, and it's curious to me.
Absolutely. I'd say, so one, yes, you definitely don't need that tech background in order to be a successful program manager within Amazon. Program managers bring a valuable skill set into the space. And it's really, I'd say when you're looking through the opportunities on Amazon's career site, looking for those, just looking for those non-tech roles and seeing where does your skill set apply. Because with a program manager, even without that technical coding background, being able to see the big picture, assess where are the risks, where are the opportunities, helping lift the organization away from, I'll say, focusing on the short term, maybe just the specifics of a feature set, and helping them understand the big picture and how what they're executing is helping the business overall. So definitely lots of value in bringing a non-technical background into a company like Amazon.
Definitely. So if you're a program manager out there and you're thinking about Amazon, don't be afraid just because you don't come from tech. It's not a prerequisite.
Exactly.
Cool. So in which case, I'd love to hear about kind of your interview process, because everybody's experience in Amazon interviews actually tends to be quite different. There's obviously a core process, but lots of deviation. So I'd love to know, like, how did you prepare and what was the actual experience?
Yeah, so my preparation, so I started out just going to the Amazon career site, finding the day one blog, digging through that to understand, I'll say, the culture, expectations, reading through the leadership principles, went down a rabbit hole of YouTube channels related to the leadership principles. And really my big takeaways were, I need to ensure I have data to support all of my responses, and I needed to have enough variety of stories that aligned to each of the leadership principles, and to ensure I had stories that didn't repeat. And so for my process, I want to say I spent about somewhere between 20 to 30 hours preparing, because once I had an understanding of what Amazon's interview process looked like, I started to, I'll say, reflect on my career to date. So I was pulling up old resumes, looking. I'm a bit of a hoarder of paperwork, so I have my I'll say prep packets from every interview I've ever done.
Ooh.
And so I went and looked through those stories and said, ooh, that is a good one. I started a new list, my Amazon story list of here's all the stories. Some of the stories, it had been a while since I had thought about that project or program. And I just started typing every single thing I could remember about that experience. What did I learn? What mistakes did I make? And then after I had that full list, started to think about, okay, which ones were the, I'll say, heavy hitters? Which of my stories really pack a punch, show my level of scope, the level of influence I had, which ones had big results? Came up with that final list, and then started to, I'll say, match them up or align them with leadership principles to see, okay, I know this one story, I could pivot it for bias for action. It could pivot to insist on the highest standards, and then made sure, again, like I had mentioned, the variety. I did not want to walk in with only 4 stories and have all 5 or 6 of my interviewers hear the same thing. So I think I walked in with about 15 stories, and I had my little Excel matrix of which story went with which leadership principle.
Yeah.
I didn't actually reference it in the interview, but it was a kind of like a safety blanket of, just in case I forget everything about myself, I can look at this sheet of paper and know what to say.
That's another favorite tip of mine, is actually taking in some very high level notes. I always say an interview is not a memory test.
Yes, 100% aligned. And then I also created, I'll call it my data points sheet, where for each story I recalled, okay, was this a multi-million-dollar budget or just sort of hundreds of $1,000? did this impact 1,000 people, and just had those really crisp data points so that I'd be able to recall them throughout the interview process. And then online, I was able to find some of the questions people have been asked in interviews. So I just paced my office answering the questions out loud, because I really see a difference between practicing in your head what you intend to say and then saying it out loud, making sure I wasn't tripping over my words, and that I'll say I was being punchy and concise. Like, this was the situation, this was the task, these were the actions I took, these were the results, and here's what I learned. Because that doesn't come naturally to sort of speak kind of like a robot, but
Yeah.
yeah. So
Cool.
my husband didn't see me for a while as I was preparing for my Amazon interviews.
I'd say that's a good amount of hours invested. I'm glad you mentioned that, because I think candidates really struggle to understand or get a feel for, like, how much time is this really going to take me? And I do try and say, if it's 50 hours, you're probably going overboard.
Mm,
But if you're not putting in kind of a good 20 to 30 hours, as you're saying, then you're probably just not going to be as concise and precise and drilled as you probably need to be.
yep.
Cool. So then sounds like you're really, really well prepared. You've got all of your data. You've got all your little bits of paper to keep you kind of on track. So when you actually had your interviews, was it kind of a virtual one, or did you actually go on site?
It was virtual because it was right in the midst of all the lockdowns due to COVID. So 100% virtual.
Virtual, right. So anything that kind of surprised you? Is there anything that kind of you didn't expect? Not necessarily that you weren't able to respond to, but anything that kind of you just say to people, think about this?
Yeah, the thing I found so surprising was the number of follow-up questions and just the different threads that the interviewers pulled on. So in my previous interview experiences with companies besides Amazon, you'd give your star answer, so situation, task, action, result, and you'd maybe get one or two follow-ups, and then you'd move on. And I had been taught, the less follow-up questions you're asked, the better your answer was. If they're asking too many questions, you messed up. And so with Amazon, just the level of detailed questions, it was just very surprising. It at first threw me off a little bit, but then realized I know my stories, I know what I've executed, and I reminded myself they're seeking data. They are collecting data in order to evaluate my fit for the role. And so I'll say, now being on the other side and being a part of Amazon, having gone through all of the training that they have us take, it all clicks. And it's so fascinating to see why our process, or why Amazon's process, is the way it is.
Yeah, so I absolutely agree. And I'm so glad you asked that question, because I literally had a candidate say to me, I think it was in one of my Q&A sessions, if I don't get any follow-up questions, is it a bad thing? Or if I get loads of follow-up questions, is it a bad thing? And I kind of said, well, actually, it could be both, because it is possible that you gave the most outstanding example, that you gave great, great detail and drilled and covered everything that they would have asked you, in which case they say, I've got everything I need, let's move on.
Yeah.
And that's great. Equally, you just might say some really interesting stuff that completely intrigues and fascinates the interviewer, and they keep asking more questions because they're enjoying talking to you. And that's a good thing as well.
Yes, I've absolutely done that. I mean, so when I go into interviews, I'll have my list of questions I intend to ask the candidate. And I typically start with give me a little bit of your background. And sometimes they mention a really interesting project they've worked on, and we'll spend the full 45 minutes just breaking that down, because it was so impactful and really resonated.
Cool. Yeah. So I just tell the candidates, don't worry about it. Don't think, when you're in the interview, if people are asking you follow-up questions, don't worry about whether it's a good sign or a bad sign. Just answer the question.
Agreed.
Okay, so Rib, I'm sorry, just 1 second. It's gone dark in my room here, and I've realized I can see myself and it looks pitch black. So give me 2 seconds, and I'm just going to turn on a light because it kind of looks like I'm living here in the darkness. Hang on. There we go. I might edit that bit out. I might not. Okay, cool. Right, I've lost my thread completely. All right, so yes, so we were talking about the interview and your surprise of the kind of what surprised you in the interview process. So
Yep.
now how long have you been in Amazon now? It's a year and a half or something like that?
Year and some change. Yeah, I started May 2020.
Right, cool. So now that you're on the inside and you've done the job for a while, one of the things our candidates are obviously going to want to know is when it comes to the kind of the key leadership principles and what it takes to be successful as a program manager in Amazon. Given your experience, what would you say are the key leadership principles for success as a program manager?
So the key ones, the first one that comes, I'm always staring at the leadership principles. And I think my answer sort of changes depending on the day. But really, for a program manager to be successful, the top one for me is earn trust. Like, are you putting in the effort to build relationships, understand the people you're working with as actual humans, and then the work that they're doing and what are they struggling with, what is going well, what energizes them. Because in my experience, a lot of times as a program manager, you don't have everyone reporting to you. You're doing a lot of leading via influence. And if no one trusts you, you don't have good relationships, you're going to struggle to be successful. If anything, you'll most likely fail. Then the other one, I would say, I want like bias for action and insist on the highest standards, which I think in one of your videos, you talk about how a lot of our leadership principles tend to be in tension. And with those ones, as a program manager, and as all Amazonians, we have that bias for action. You see a problem, go ahead, solve it, implement a process or mechanism to fix it. Though sometimes in trying to move quickly, what you're implementing might not meet your standards bar. And so then how, as a program manager, do you balance? Let's have a quick, scrappy solution, but here's my long-term plan where in 4 weeks, we'll have a clean, I'll say elegant solution that we can continue to execute and doesn't have a high amount of burden. And so I think it's really those three.
I love that. I love that way of, I've never thought of it that way, of resolving the tension that exists between bias for action. Is that just do it and then improve it, iterate, optimize, and you've got those two boxes ticked.
Yep.
That's awesome. That's awesome. Cool. So then I think we covered a lot of ground here today. One other question that actually hadn't occurred to me to ask you in the prep, but I'm going to ask you now, having had a chat with you a little bit beforehand. I don't think it's going to be too hard for you to come up with this one, but what do you see as the big mistakes that candidates make when they come to interview? What are the things that you sit there going, man, you just that wasn't necessary. If you had done this, we wouldn't be doing this.
Yes.
Shoot.
The big mistakes. One, not writing down the questions I ask. I have so many times where people answer, I didn't ask that question. And it just goes down a different rabbit hole. And so, I'll do the follow-ups and there's still, I want to be a good experience for the candidate. I'm asking follow-up questions and they're not hearing me, which I contribute to nervousness. I do understand people come into interviews nervous. But it's completely okay to ask me to repeat a question. And I always say that up front, ask me as many times as you need. Didn't just write it down, write the question down. That's something I personally do in interviews. I sometimes make the person say it 3 times because it'll be a 7-parter. And I'm like, well, say it one more time. I want to ensure I answer and I give you the data that you need. And that's perfectly fine. So not answering the right question, that's one of the biggest mistakes I see. And not reading the job description clearly. I have people who come into interviews and all of their answers just seem very off. They're not giving me any data to support what the job description says the role is and how I verbally describe the role. And sometimes when we get to the end of the interview, I leave time for the candidate to ask questions of me, and they'll say, "Oh, so is this role really more like X or is it Y?" And I'm like, "Oh, no, it's Z. The role is Z." And I'm not quite sure what's happening there, where sometimes candidates just come in with a disconnect on what the position is. So I really encourage candidates, read the job description. When the recruiter is engaging with you, ask the recruiter a lot of those questions to get crisp on, are you preparing in the right manner and do you truly understand what the job description is asking for? Because that's not fun to answer all your questions thinking the job is one thing and the job is something else.
Or to have even gone through an interview process as challenging as Amazon's interview process to discover it's actually not the job that you would want anyway, right?
Yep.
I mean, I think you make a really good point about the recruiter and using the recruiter. I get a lot of questions coming to me on my channel, and my first response is, you should ask your recruiter that question.
Yeah.
They're on your side. They're your best friend, because if you get the job, then they get rewarded. So
Yeah.
use them.
100%.
I think candidates are quite reticent to ask questions because they worry it makes them sound like they are ill prepared. I won't use the word stupid, but I'm not quite sure what other word to use. And at Amazon, it's the opposite, right? You've got to ask questions.
Yeah,
That's what
clarity is going to help you be the most successful.
For sure. Cool. So those are great tips. The write down the question is my favorite tip. It's my it's my biggest video on my YouTube channel and the one people always talk to me about. So you and I are obviously on the same wavelength.
Ooh, Gigi, I have one more
Oh,
of a
good.
biggest mistake.
Go on.
When it comes time at the end for the candidate to ask questions, I hesitate to say make sure you have good questions because, I think all questions are good. However, some are better than others. Like, I wouldn't ask the question.
Give us an example of a bad one. Go on.
Like, one is, so how big is Amazon? Like 8,000 people? Please do that's something please Google. Maybe glance at the paper every once in a while. Or I've had individuals confuse Prime Air versus Amazon Air. So this whole time they thought they were interviewing for an opportunity to work with our actual large aircraft in the middle mile space, not the drone delivery program. And so I'll say the basics, just do the basic homework and make sure you come in. I'll say come in with questions that if you Googled it, you'd get nothing. You'd get nothing of value.
That's a brilliant tip. Like, before you go into, I'm going to steal this one. Before you go into the interview, Google your questions. And if you've answered it on page 1, don't ask that question.
Exactly.
I am stealing that for my YouTube channel. Thank you.
Oh, absolutely.
I'll attribute you for it. Got another one.
I just thought of one more because I'm going through memories.
Keep going.
I've had a couple instances where people ask kind of maybe rude / smarmy-ish questions thinking they're about to one-up me, or they'll be like, oh, I heard your team is, completely failing at X, and I saw this in the paper, and, from my reading of the literature, blah, 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 blah. I'll be like, no, it's actually quite the opposite. There's actually this recent article talking about this, if you look at the Day One blog, and it's just this odd attitude. I don't know if people are thinking if they stump me, they get kudo points, which absolutely ask me hard questions and I'll be very transparent, but it's those, I don't know, little pokey ones of here's a huge failure I saw, and you're not seen in a good light. Now respond to that. And granted, I think there's a right way you can ask that question of, I saw a recent article that alluded to the fact X is happening. Could you shed more light on that? Versus, I saw your whole team is failing. What's that about? Is that going well? Right. There's that difference of
Yeah.
questioning what's happening in this space, and don't be the smarmy one.
Yeah. And I wonder whether that comes from, I think there's a little bit of noise out there in the influencer space that kind of suggests that when you're going into an interview, it's some kind of a combative situation where you need to prove that you're smarter than the person on the other side of the table, because if they feel you're smarter than them, then you'll get the job. I'm paraphrasing, of course, but I do wonder whether it comes from that type of a space. What do you think?
Interesting. Yeah, I could see that. I guess be wary of the LinkedIn influencers. That's definitely look into people's credentials.
Yeah, I agree.
When reading those LinkedIn posts.
And I think if you're going into an Amazon interview, the person really wants you to succeed.
Yeah.
Because, I mean, Amazonians put so much time into the process. I mean, from your point of view, you probably, if you're interviewing someone, it's at least an hour and a half, maybe 2 hours by the time you prep, do the interview, write up your notes, and that's like early rounds, debrief.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, it is quite the commitment. Yeah, you're spot on. I spend usually maybe 30 to 45 minutes to prep, especially if I wasn't the one to do the phone screen. I really put, more on the 45 minutes to prep for the on-site interview.
That's a lot of prep, by the way.
Yeah, and then to reflect and type up my notes and see what data did the individual give me. I mean, 45 minutes, sometimes an hour 15.
Yeah.
Because I really want to make sure, what did I truly hear the candidates say? What data did they provide? Compare it to the role. And then I always, walk away, come back, do a bias check. Is something that I interpreted an unfair interpretation? What are the true facts? So yeah, we want people to be successful. We don't take the process lightly. And all of the individuals doing the interviews, they've all been on the other side. They know that it takes a lot of preparation, and it's we're not here to waste anyone's time. Yeah,
for sure. I mean, you were saying you did like 20 to 30 hours we were talking about in terms of your preparation. Now, that's a good old chunk of time to invest in being prepared for an interview.
Yeah.
And it's worth doing. I know for some candidates it's frustrating because maybe they fail at the first stage, and having put in so much effort, they're really frustrated by that. But my feedback to those guys, it's never going to be wasted, right? You'll interview somewhere else at least,
Yeah, you're well prepared. And I feel I read somewhere on maybe one of the Amazon blogs that it's not a high percentage of individuals who get into Amazon after only one interview experience. I think the norm is about 2.
Oh, really? That's interesting. That's good. So people out there, all of you people who are going around doing your first or having done your first and going for a second attempt, it's very normal.
Yep.
That's good to know. Cool. Well, on that juicy fact, that's a brilliant fact. I'd love to know the actual data point on that.
I said you should fact check me.
I don't know how I would do that because I'm on the outside and you're on the inside. But maybe you can fact check it and then let me know whether I should edit it out or not.
Absolutely.
Oh, Rib, thank you so much. It's been an absolute pleasure talking to you. And now I definitely know the difference between Prime Air and Amazon Air, because I'm not sure I would have known that difference before. So I learned something. That's awesome. And I will let you get back to get on with your Saturday. I really appreciate your time. Thank you so much.
Absolutely, Gigi. Thanks again for having me on your channel.
You're absolutely welcome. I will have you back one time. I think I'm trying to think about kind of panel sessions I could have with a few Amazonians where we could have a bit of a chat and maybe a bit of a giggle.
That would be fun. Looking forward to it.
Awesome. I'm going to end the broadcast now. You take care.
Perfect.
Bye.
Bye.